My name is Clara. I'm 32 years old, and for the past 2 years, my life has been a quiet echo of what it once was. My husband, Sergeant Mark Riley, was the love of my life, a steady anchor in my often turbulent world, and losing him in a routine training accident shattered my universe into a million unrecognizable pieces. At my younger sister's wedding, a grand affair designed to showcase my family's success, I gave her a gift I'd poured my soul into, a handcrafted hope chest made from wood with a sacred, hidden history only Mark and I knew. In front of 200 guests, in a moment of breathtaking cruelty, my parents picked it up, laughed, and called it a pathetic, cheap little box. My father told me to hide it before I embarrassed the family further. Their laughter echoed in the grand ballroom, a sound I will never forget. But that laughter died a sudden, choked death when a two-star general, a commander from Mark's unit who was a surprise guest, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of authority as he warned them that if they so much as scratched that cheap little box, they would be answering directly to the United States government. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that they weren't just mocking a piece of wood. They were disrespecting a national treasure, and in doing so, they had finally given me the weapon I needed to sever the chains of their lifelong disapproval. If you believe that the true value of a gift comes from the heart, not the price tag, and that honor is worth more than gold, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. And before I tell you how this one humble gift exposed a deep rot in my family that had been festering for decades, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in the face of disrespect and honoring the legacy of those we love. Before that humiliating, clarifying day at the wedding, my life was a constant, exhausting, balancing act. On one side was the authentic, profound love I shared with Mark, a love built on shared values, mutual respect, and quiet understanding. On the other was my parents, Richard and Eleanor's, quiet, persistent, and soul-crushing disapproval of that very love. I am a custom woodworker, a craft I inherited from my grandfather. My workshop, a converted garage behind the small house Mark and I bought, is my sanctuary. The rich, earthy scent of cedar, pine, and sawdust is the air I breathe best. It's a place of creation, where I can turn rough, unyielding material into something beautiful and functional. It's where I feel closest to my grandfather's memory. And now, where I feel the lingering presence of Mark, who always believed in my talent more than I did myself. He used to stand in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, a soft smile on his face as he watched me work. "You create magic, Clara," he'd say. "You make things that last." Oh, Mark wasn't the man my parents had envisioned for me. He wasn't a line item on their checklist for a successful daughter. Richard and Eleanor Riley measure a person's worth by their portfolio, their zip code, and the brand of their car. My father is a commercial real estate developer who sees cities not as places where people live, but as a collection of assets to be bought and sold. My mother is a high society fundraiser, a woman who orchestrates million-dollar galas with military precision but can't seem to muster a single moment of genuine warmth for her own daughter. Their world is one of polished surfaces, strategic alliances disguised as friendships, and silent, transactional relationships. Mark was a sergeant in the Army. He measured life in acts of service, in the unwavering loyalty of brotherhood, and in the quiet dignity of a promise kept. He was strong, but his strength was gentle. He was kind without fanfare, and he had a smile that could calm any storm raging in my soul, a smile that reached all the way to his clear, honest blue eyes. The first time I brought him home, I watched him through my parents' eyes, and my heart sank. They didn't see the man I loved. They saw his modest sergeant's salary, his 10-year-old Ford pickup that he maintained himself, and his calloused hands that told a story of hard work and capability, and they dismissed him in an instant. "A soldier is a noble profession, dear," my mother had said later that evening, her tone dripping with the sort of condescension she usually reserved for the catering staff. "But is it stable?" What are his prospects beyond that? She couldn't even bring herself to say the army, as if it were a dirty word. My father, ever the pragmatist, was more direct. Over a tense dinner where Mark answered his questions with unwavering respect, my father grilled him about his 5-year plan. He was visibly unimpressed when Mark talked about re-enlistment, mentorship, and leadership roles within his unit, rather than stock options, promotions, and climbing a corporate ladder. So, no real ambition for wealth, then? My father had concluded, making it sound like a terminal diagnosis. For the 8 years we were together, that evening set the tone. They treated my husband with a polite, icy tolerance that was somehow more insulting than outright hostility. They often referred to him as your soldier in conversation, as if he were an accessory I'd acquired, not a member of the family. When he was on his first deployment to Afghanistan, a year that I barely survived, they called me once a month. The conversation was always the same. "How are you holding up, dear?" my mother would ask. "Has your soldier written?" Not, "How is Mark? Is he safe?" It was as if he were a character in a story, not my husband in a war zone. The financial slights were a constant, petty reminder of our place in their hierarchy. The Christmas they gifted my younger sister, Chloe, and her then fiancé, a staggering down payment on a luxury condo, they presented Mark and me with a high-end coffee machine. It was a nice gift, objectively, but the disparity was a chasm. When I thanked them, trying to keep my voice even, my father patted my arm with faux sympathy. "We know money must be tight for you two. Every little bit helps." He said it loudly, in front of the entire extended family, a public performance of their magnanimity and our supposed poverty. Mark just squeezed my hand under the table, his quiet strength a shield against their casual cruelty. After Mark's death, their behavior didn't soften with sympathy. It sharpened with opportunity. They saw me not as a grieving widow to be comforted, but as a failing project to be salvaged, a daughter who could finally be remolded into their image now that the soldier's influence was gone. I remember one particularly painful conversation 3 months after the funeral. My mother sat me down in her pristine, all-white living room, a room so sterile it felt like an operating theater. "Clara, it's time to be practical," she began, her voice devoid of any real emotion. "Mark was a good man, in his own way, but let's be honest, he left you with very little. This little woodworking hobby of yours is sweet, but it won't pay the bills in the real world. Richard and I have a plan. We think you should sell the house, move into a more manageable apartment, and we can start introducing you to some people. Andrew Henderson, you remember him? He's a cardiologist now, recently divorced." I stared at her, the grief in my chest turning into a cold, hard knot of rage. The house wasn't just a house. It was the home Mark and I had painstakingly renovated together. Every floorboard we'd sanded, every wall we'd painted, every tile we'd laid held a memory, a piece of our shared life. My hobby was my business, a business I was slowly and successfully building. A business that brought me not just income, but solace and purpose. They didn't see any of that. They just saw my life as a failure according to their rigid, materialistic metrics. They wanted to erase every trace of Mark, to scrub away the life I had chosen and loved, and replace it with one they could proudly display at their next charity gala. I politely but firmly declined, telling them I was financially stable and that my business was growing. They exchanged that familiar, pitying glance, a silent communication that screamed, "She's being difficult and emotional. She doesn't know what's good for her." This was the foundation of our relationship. Their world of polished, empty surfaces, and my world of authentic, unvarnished love. They were two different languages, and we had long since lost the ability to translate. I thought I could continue to navigate this painful divide, to keep the fragile peace for the sake of a family I was starting to realize might only exist in my imagination. But I had no idea that my sister's wedding was about to become the battlefield where this long, cold war would finally, irrevocably, turn hot. The catalyst for the explosion arrived, as they often do, in a deceptively beautiful package, a thick, cream-colored, gold-embossed envelope. My younger sister, Chloe, was getting married. Chloe was, in many ways, my parents' masterpiece, the daughter who had never strayed from the blueprint. She worked in marketing for our father's company, drove a German luxury car they'd bought her as a graduation gift, and was marrying a man they thoroughly approved of, a finance guy named Todd, who talked about market portfolios with the same passion Mark used to reserve for the history of the 10th Mountain Division. I loved my sister. I truly did. But our relationship had always been filtered through the thick, distorting lens of our parents' expectations. She was the one who complied, the one who reflected their values back at them. I was the one who disappointed, the one who held up a mirror to a life they couldn't understand or control. The wedding was to be a massive, extravagant affair at the Sentinel, the city's most exclusive and historic hotel ballroom. The planning process was a military campaign, orchestrated by my mother. Every detail was designed to broadcast a message of wealth, status, and impeccable taste. The gift registry was a digital manifestation of this philosophy. As I scrolled through the list on the high-end department store's website, a familiar sense of alienation washed over me. Crystal vases that cost more than my monthly mortgage, designer appliances that seemed to have more functions than a spaceship, and a honeymoon fund with a target that could have financed one of Mark's old platoons for a year. I couldn't afford any of it, not without dipping into the life insurance money I had guarded so carefully, the last tangible piece of security Mark had left me. More than that, none of it felt right. Giving $1,000 blender felt as impersonal and cold as the relationship my parents had with the world. It wasn't a gift, it was a transaction. That evening, I retreated to my workshop, the one place on earth where the noise of their world faded away. The scent of pine and oak hung in the air, a familiar comfort. My hand, as if by instinct, drifted over a stack of dark, richly grained wood tucked away in a special corner. It was a sacred material, something Mark had brought home a year before he died, his eyes shining with a reverence I had rarely seen outside of a memorial service. It was wood reclaimed from a fallen oak tree at Fort Adams, a tree that had been affectionately known as the Independence Oak. It had stood sentinel over the base for over 200 years, a silent witness to generations of soldiers, including Mark's own grandfather, who had enlisted there in World War II. Mark had been part of the honor guard, tasked with respectfully dismantling the ancient tree after a hurricane had mortally wounded it. His commanding officer, Commander Thompson, a man Mark deeply respected, had seen the look on Mark's face as he handled the historic wood. He allowed him to keep a few precious planks, a highly unusual exception. One day, Mark had said to me that night, his voice hushed with awe as he ran his hands over the wood, "I'll make something for us from this, something that tells a story, something that will last." He never got the chance. The unfairness of it all, the stolen future, washed over me again. But then, a new feeling emerged from the grief. Purpose. He couldn't make it, but I could. Suddenly, I knew exactly what my gift to Chloe would be. It wouldn't be something you could click and buy. It would be something only I could give. I would make her a hope chest, a family heirloom, a bridge between the past and her future. I would pour every ounce of my skill, my love, and my memory of Mark into its creation. For the next 6 weeks, my workshop became my world. The project consumed me in the best possible way. I spent every spare moment measuring, cutting, and sanding, often late into the night with Mark's favorite music playing softly in the background. I used intricate dovetail joints my grandfather had taught me, a technique that requires immense patience and precision, symbolizing the strength and interlocking nature of family. I carved their initials, C and T, into the lid, surrounding them with delicate olive branches, a symbol of the peace I so desperately wished for her, and for our family. As I worked, I felt Mark's presence with me, a quiet encouragement, the memory of his hand on my back as he watched me at my workbench. This chest wasn't just a gift for Chloe. It was a tribute to my husband, a final, beautiful collaboration between us. During this time, my parents were orchestrating their own grand gesture. My mother would call me with breathless, secretive updates. "We've found the perfect thing for Chloe. It's a surprise, of course, but let's just say it's her favorite color and it goes very, very fast." It was, of course, a car. A brand new, pearl white luxury sedan. They were having it delivered to the reception, complete with a comically oversized red bow. "It's important to give a gift that makes a statement," my father declared on a family conference call. "It shows support. It shows you want the new couple to start their lives on the right foot." The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. A grand, expensive gift was a direct measure of love and support. I knew then, with a sinking feeling, that my humble wooden chest, rich with history and love that money could never buy, would be seen by them as nothing more than a poor, embarrassing substitute. But I held on to a sliver of hope that my sister, at least, would understand its true worth. I finished the chest the night before the wedding, rubbing the final coat of natural oil into the wood until it glowed with a deep, warm inner luster. It was, I thought with a swell of pride, the most beautiful and meaningful thing I had ever made. I wrapped it carefully in a simple, clean linen cloth, forgoing a flashy box. I was nervous, but I was also proud. I felt I was bringing a piece of Mark, a piece of our family's real, unvarnished history, to this new beginning. Little did I know, I was walking into a carefully laid ambush where my heartfelt offering would be used as the primary weapon against me. The day of the wedding arrived, a perfect, sun-drenched Saturday in June that felt like a cruel joke given the storm brewing in my heart. The Sentinel Ballroom was even more breathtaking than I had imagined. A cavern of historic elegance with soaring ceilings, impossibly large crystal chandeliers, and an ocean of white roses and peonies. It was my parents' vision of perfection, a meticulously crafted stage set for a grand performance of their success. I arrived early, maneuvering the heavy chest through a side entrance to avoid the arriving guests. My muscles ached, but it was a good ache, an honest ache from hours of labor. I found the gift table, already laden with glossy, perfectly wrapped boxes from high-end department stores and luxury brands. I placed my linen-wrapped offering among them. It looked small, humble, and deeply out of place. A piece of quiet earth amidst a shimmering sea of commercial glitter. The first of many slights that day came moments later. I spotted my parents holding court near the entrance, greeting their influential friends with air kisses and booming laughs. "Mother, Father," I said, approaching them with a smile I had practiced in the car. My mother turned, and her eyes did a swift, critical sweep of my attire. I was wearing a simple, elegant navy dress that I had designed and sewn myself. It was classic, understated, and fit me perfectly. In her eyes, however, it screamed homemade. A flicker of disapproval crossed her face before being replaced by a brittle, social smile. "Clara, you're here," she said, her tone making it sound like my attendance had been in question. "Your father and I were just speaking with the Hendersons. You remember them, don't you? Their son, Andrew, just made partner at Goldman Sachs. He's here today." She turned back to her conversation, a clear and practiced dismissal. My father gave me a curt nod, his attention already captured by a story a fellow developer was telling about a recent golf trip to Pebble Beach. In that moment, I was utterly invisible to them, a background character in the grand production of their favored daughter's wedding. I tried to shake off the familiar sting, finding a seat in the back for the ceremony. It was beautiful, of course. Chloe looked radiant, and Todd looked appropriately handsome. But every mention of family, of undying love, of building a future together, was a sharp, painful reminder of everything I had lost. I felt Mark's absence like a physical presence beside me, a void in the pew that no one else could see. During the cocktail hour that followed, the tension I felt began to mount into a palpable dread. I was attempting to make small talk with my cousin Sarah when my father approached, a glass of champagne in his hand, his face slightly flushed. "Clara," he said, his voice a little too loud, drawing the attention of those nearby. "Good to see you out of that dusty workshop for a change. You clean up nicely." He beamed as if he had just paid me the highest compliment. "You know," he continued, leaning in conspiratorially, "Todd's father, a great guy, offered to set you up with his firm's chief accountant. A very successful man. Divorced. No kids. You should really think about it. There's no use in moping around forever." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of ownership rather than affection, and walked away, leaving me stunned and utterly humiliated in a circle of silence. My grief, my sacred, private grief for my husband, was moping. And the solution, in his world, was to be passed along to another man he deemed financially suitable, like a piece of property. He wasn't trying to help me heal. He was trying to solve the problem of his widowed, under-earning daughter. The real performance, however, began after the dinner plates were cleared. It was time for the gifts. My father, in his element, took the microphone from the band leader, his face beaming with self-satisfaction. "Chloe and Todd," he announced, his voice echoing through the vast ballroom. "Your mother and I wanted to give you something special, something to help you on your new journey together." He gestured dramatically towards the ballroom's main doors. On cue, they swung open to reveal the pearl-white luxury sedan, adorned with that comically oversized red bow. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath, which then erupted into thunderous applause. Chloe shrieked with genuine delight, a sound of pure, unadulterated materialism, and ran to embrace my parents. It was a spectacle, a carefully orchestrated moment designed not just to delight his daughter, but to showcase his wealth and generosity to all 200 witnesses. After the applause finally died down, the DJ announced it was time for the couple to open a few more select gifts at their head table. My heart sank into my stomach as I saw a waiter, looking slightly confused by the simple wrapping, carry my chest to them. It looked even smaller and more foolish now, a relic from another world after the grand display of the car. Chloe, still giddy and flushed from the excitement, began to unwrap it. "Oh, this is from my sister Clara," she said, her voice bright and a little breathless. She pulled away the linen cloth, revealing the glowing, hand-rubbed wood beneath. For a brief, hopeful moment, she was quiet, her fingers tracing the carved initials on the lid. "It's a box," she said finally, a note of confusion in her voice. She looked up at me across the room, her expression a mixture of apology and bewilderment. My father, never one to miss an opportunity for a joke at someone else's expense, leaned over her shoulder. "What is it, a shoebox?" he boomed, laughing loudly. A few people at the nearby tables tittered nervously, unsure if they were supposed to join in. "Clara made it," Chloe explained quietly, her cheeks turning pink. She clearly felt the awkwardness of the moment. My mother picked up the small, handwritten card I had attached. She held it at a distance, as if it might be contagious. "It says it's a hope chest," she read, her lips curling into a tight, pitying smile that was far more cruel than any frown. How rustic. Todd, the groom, who had been examining the car keys, gave the chest a dismissive tap with his knuckle. "Solid wood, I guess," he said, his disinterest palpable, before turning his attention to the next gift, a sleek, chrome espresso machine that elicited far more excitement. But my parents weren't done twisting the knife. It wasn't enough to dismiss the gift. They had to punish me for it. My father walked directly over to my table, his movements stiff with anger. He leaned down, his face close to mine, his voice a low, furious whisper meant only for me but felt by the entire table. "Are you serious, Clara? A wooden box? After we just gave your sister a $60,000 car, you bring this piece of firewood? You are embarrassing us. You are embarrassing your sister." "It's handmade," I stammered, my voice barely audible, the words feeling pathetic and small. "The wood is special." "Special?" my mother hissed, having followed him like a shadow. "It looks like you pulled it from a dumpster behind your little workshop. This is Chloe's wedding day. The most important day of her life, not some backwoods craft fair. For God's sake, have some class. Think of the family's reputation." That's when I felt a gentle, steady hand on my shoulder. It was Uncle Arthur, my father's older brother, a retired history professor who had always treated me with kindness and Mark with respect. He had been sitting at the next table and had clearly overheard everything. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me with such profound sympathy in his eyes, a silent acknowledgement of my pain, and then he shot a look of pure, unadulterated disgust at my parents. His silent support was the only thing that kept me from bursting into tears right there. He knew. He saw their casual, brutal cruelty for exactly what it was. My parents, however, were oblivious, wrapped in their bubble of arrogance. They had unmasked themselves completely, revealing the cold, transactional, and hollow core of their values. My gift wasn't measured by the weeks of labor, the deep history, or the boundless love I had poured into it, but by a monetary value they deemed worthless, and in their eyes, so was I. I sat frozen at my table, the joyful music of the reception turning into a discordant, buzzing mockery in my ears. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that started in my chest and spread up my neck to my face. I felt as if a spotlight was trained on me, illuminating my inadequacy for all to see. I watched as the waiter, at a subtle, almost imperceptible nod from my father, moved to take the chest off the head table. He carried it away, not back to the gift table, but towards a shadowed corner of the grand ballroom, by the service exit. He placed it next to a stack of empty catering boxes and a bin for discarded linens. My creation, my tribute to Mark, my piece of living history, was being treated like a piece of trash, set aside to be hauled out with the garbage. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to sink through the floor and vanish, to run out of that ballroom and never look back at their smug, judgmental faces again. I spent the next hour trapped in a social nightmare, feigning politeness, accepting pitying looks from relatives who had witnessed the public shaming, and actively avoiding the triumphant, self-satisfied gaze of my parents. They had won. They had put me back in my place. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided I would slip out quietly, without a word. But first, I had to retrieve the chest. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving it here, of it being forgotten in a storage closet or, worse, being unceremoniously thrown away by the hotel staff at the end of the night. The thought of it lying in a dumpster was a physical pain, a desecration of Mark's memory. I pushed my chair back and made my way towards the gift table, my movements stiff and robotic. The chest, of course, wasn't there. My blood ran cold. I scanned the room, my eyes darting around frantically, and then I saw it, tucked away in that shadowed corner by the service exit, just as I'd seen the waiter place it, looking forlorn and abandoned. It had been literally set aside with the refuse. That was the moment something inside me shifted, a tectonic plate of emotion grinding into a new position. The hurt, the embarrassment, the deep-seated desire for their approval, it all burned away, vaporized by a sudden, cold, clear rage. This wasn't just about me anymore. This wasn't just about my feelings being hurt. They had disrespected my work, the one thing that was truly mine. They had disrespected my love for my sister. And now, they were profoundly, unforgivably disrespecting the memory of my husband. That chest was a piece of him. That wood was sacred. Their ignorance, their obsession with money, was no longer a valid excuse for this level of sacrilege. As I walked with purpose towards that corner, my father intercepted me, his face a mask of supreme irritation. "What are you doing now, Clara? People are starting to notice you skulking around the edges of the room. Go have a dance with your uncle or something. For God's sake, at least try to look like you're having a good time." "I'm getting my gift," I said, my voice dangerously calm, a quiet that surprised even me. and then I'm leaving. Don't be ridiculous, he scoffed, grabbing my arm. You can't leave now. The cake hasn't even been cut. And for heaven's sake, leave that thing here. We'll figure out what to do with it later. He paused, looking at the chest with disdain. Maybe Chloe can use it to store old magazines in the garage. At least then it would be useful. The garage. The two words echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of my mind. He was going to relegate my heartfelt gift, the embodiment of Mark's legacy, the artifact of American history, to a dusty, spider-filled space for junk. That was the final, unforgivable insult. That was the Zot Nuk Chan Li. That was the point of no return. No, I said, my voice ringing with a newfound authority that made him instinctively drop his hand from my arm and take a half-step back. I'm taking it now. I pushed past him without another word and walked to the corner. I knelt down, my hands trembling with a righteous fury, and reached for the chest. I wouldn't do that if I were you. My mother's sharp, imperious voice cut through the air. She had appeared beside my father, a matched set of disapproval, her arms crossed tightly over her expensive designer gown. You are making an incredible scene. You are ruining your sister's wedding with your incessant melodrama over a wooden box. The only people making a scene, I replied, standing up slowly, the solid, heavy weight of the chest in my arms feeling like a shield, are the ones who would treat a gift of love like a piece of trash. This was it, the breaking point, the moment of absolute clarity. I realized that their approval was a cage I had been willingly living in my whole life, always hoping for a crumb of validation that would never come. Their love was conditional, transactional, based on compliance and monetary worth. And Mark, my dear, honorable Mark, had loved me unconditionally. He had seen my value when no one else had. He had cherished my spirit. In that moment, I knew I wasn't just fighting for a wooden box. I was fighting for him. I was fighting for the honorable life we had built. I was fighting for myself. And I was about to use the secret weapon he had inadvertently left me to end this fight once and for all. Clutching the heavy chest to my heart, I turned to face them. The lively music from the band seemed to fade into a distant, irrelevant hum. A small circle of silence had formed around us as the nearby guests, sensing the escalating drama, stopped their conversations to watch. My parents stood there, a united front of indignation, their faces set in stone, ready to shut down my melodrama and restore social order. They thought they held all the cards. They thought I was just their emotional, grieving daughter, acting out in a way that was socially inconvenient. They had absolutely no idea that the cheap little box I was holding was, in fact, the most powerful weapon in the room. This isn't just a box, I said, my voice steady and clear, carrying across the space with an unexpected resonance. And it's not a piece of firewood. You wanted a gift that makes a statement, Father. You said so yourself. Well, this chest makes a statement that you are utterly, fundamentally incapable of understanding. With deliberate, careful movements, I walked to a nearby empty table and set the chest down upon it. I ran my hand over the smooth, glowing lid, over the initials I had so lovingly carved. The feel of the wood grounded me, connecting me to Mark, to my grandfather, to a legacy of true worth. This wood, I announced, my voice growing stronger, my audience expanding as more heads turned in our direction, is from the historic Independence Oak at Fort Adams. It was a tree that stood for over 200 years, a living witness to our nation's history. It was planted the year the fort was first commissioned, and it stood guard over generations of soldiers. A few murmurs of interest rippled through the onlookers. My Uncle Arthur stepped closer, his historian's eyes wide with dawning comprehension and awe. My parents, however, just looked confused, their arrogance momentarily replaced by bewilderment. So it's old wood, my father said dismissively, trying to regain his footing. That doesn't make it valuable. I've got older furniture than that in my office. It's not just old, Father. It's historically significant. When that tree was critically damaged in a storm 2 years ago, it wasn't just chopped up for firewood. A team of historical preservationists from the U.S. Army Center of Military History was called in. Every single piece of that wood that was salvageable is accounted for. It's been cataloged, documented, and is under the official protection of the Department of the Army. Most of it, I added, letting the words hang in the air, is now in a climate-controlled environment at the National Museum of the United States Army. I let that sink in, watching their faces. My mother's perfectly made-up expression was beginning to show cracks of deep uncertainty. Her practiced social smile had vanished. "My husband, Sergeant Mark Riley," I continued, my voice thick with a pride that swelled in my chest, was part of the honor guard that was entrusted with the preservation of that wood. Because of his dedication, his demonstrable respect for history, and his own family's legacy of service, his commanding officer, Commander Thompson, gave him special permission to keep a small number of planks. This was done under one condition: that he would one day craft them into something that would honor the legacy of the soldiers who had served, lived, and died under the shade of that ancient tree. I reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out my phone. Before coming to the wedding, a small, nagging voice, a voice that sounded a lot like Mark's practical forethought, had told me I might need proof. I had asked Commander Thompson if he would be willing to write a small letter of provenance for the gift, just a simple note that Chloe could keep with the chest to explain its history. He had done one better. He had told me, "Clara, in a world like your parents', words on paper can be dismissed. Let me make it clear for them." He had sent me a short, 30-second video. I had it saved and ready. My hands were perfectly steady as I turned the phone to face my parents and pressed play. The distinguished, unsmiling face of a 2-star general, Commander Frank Thompson, filled the screen. He was in his full-dress uniform, the American flag and the flag of his unit standing crisp and official behind him. His voice was deep, calm, and carried an unmistakable weight of authority. "For Chloe and Todd Riley," he began, his gaze direct and piercing, as if he were looking right through the screen, right at my parents. "I understand you are the recipients of a hope chest made by the gifted artisan, Clara Riley. I wanted to personally attest to the profound significance of this gift. The wood it is made from is, without exaggeration, a piece of American history. It is priceless, not only for its age but for the legacy of service and sacrifice it represents." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "That wood is technically on loan from the U.S. Army Archives, a special dispensation made directly to Sergeant Riley for his exemplary service and his commitment to honoring military tradition. We have it cataloged under acquisition number 77B4. It is, in essence, government property entrusted to your family's care. We trust you will treat it with the respect it deserves." He wasn't finished. His eyes narrowed slightly. Sergeant Riley was a man of immense honor and integrity. This chest, crafted by his wife, is the fulfillment of his wish to create a lasting tribute. Therefore, I must also add a formal warning. Any damage, sale, or disposal of this artifact must be reported immediately to my office. To treat it as anything less than a museum-quality piece would be a profound insult to the memory of a fallen American soldier and the very legacy he sought to preserve. Do not touch it without proper care. I stopped the video. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, a vacuum where the music and chatter had been. You could have heard a pin drop on the acres of polished marble floor. I looked at my parents. Their faces had gone from arrogant to confused to utterly, devastatingly pale. My father's jaw was slack, his mouth slightly agape. My mother looked like she was going to be physically sick. They hadn't just insulted my gift. They had insulted a decorated soldier in front of his commanding officer. They had threatened to throw away catalogued government property. They had done it all in front of 200 witnesses. I picked up the chest. The plan wasn't just to leave anymore. The plan was to give them a lesson in true value that they would never, ever forget. The air in our corner of the ballroom was thick with a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight, pressing down on everyone. Every eye was locked on my parents, who stood frozen, their faces a ghastly tableau of shock and dawning horror. The commander's words priceless, government property, insult to a fallen soldier hung in the air, each one a wrecking ball to the carefully constructed facade of social superiority they had spent their entire lives building. "So you see," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a shard of glass, "it's not a cheap little box. It's not a piece of firewood. It's a piece of our nation's history, entrusted to me by my husband, a man who gave his life for the country you seem to value so little." I turned my gaze directly to my father, whose face had turned a mottled, unhealthy shade of red. "You wanted to use it to store old magazines in the garage, I believe? Is that the proper way to handle a historical artifact, father?" His mouth opened and then closed, like a fish gasping for air. No sound came out. For the first time in his loud, bombastic life, my father was utterly speechless. My mother found her voice first, a high, strained whisper that was barely audible. "Clara, we didn't know. How could we possibly have known?" "You didn't know because you never bothered to ask." I shot back, my carefully maintained calm finally breaking into a tremor of long-suppressed, righteous fury. "You never saw Mark." "Not really. You saw a salary you considered inadequate. You saw a uniform you considered common. You never, not once, saw the man. You never saw his honor, his integrity, his deep and abiding love for history and for his family. You looked at this chest and you didn't see the 6 weeks of painstaking work, the love I poured into it, the legacy it represented. You saw a price tag. And because it didn't have one you could read in a Neiman Marcus catalog, you deemed it, and by extension me, worthless." My Uncle Arthur stepped forward then, placing a firm, supportive hand on my arm. He looked at his younger brother with an expression of profound and undisguised disappointment. "Richard, Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy with a shame that was clearly on my behalf. "What have you done?" Chloe and Todd, who had been at the center of the room, finally pushed through the semicircle of onlookers that had formed, their faces masks of bewilderment. "What is going on?" Chloe asked, her eyes darting from my face to our parents' stricken expressions. "What's wrong with the box? Clara, what did that man in the video mean?" "There's nothing wrong with the chest, Chloe," I said, my voice softening instantly as I looked at my sister. Her confusion was genuine, and my heart ached for her. This was her wedding day, now forever tainted by this ugly, unnecessary confrontation. "It's beautiful, and it was made for you with all my love. But our parents just publicly declared it a piece of trash and were about to have it thrown out with the catering boxes." Chloe gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. She looked at our parents in utter disbelief. "What? Why would you do that? It's from my sister!" My father finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "It was a misunderstanding, a simple misunderstanding. We were joking." "Was it a joke when you told me I was embarrassing the family in front of my own cousin?" I countered, my voice rising again. "Was it a joke when you called my tribute to my dead husband pathetic and rustic? Was it a joke when you ordered a waiter to hide it with the garbage by the service exit? Because I have to tell you, none of it felt very funny to me." The crowd of onlookers was growing, the story spreading through the reception in hushed, shocked whispers. The family of the bride insulted a priceless gift, made in memory of a war hero. Government property, the social humiliation, a fate worse than death in my parents' carefully curated world was descending upon them like a thick, suffocating fog. My mother, a master of social manipulation, seemed to realize this, and switched tactics in a desperate, last-ditch effort. Her eyes filled with practiced theatrical tears. "Clara, please," she pleaded, reaching a trembling hand for me. "Don't do this. You're making a terrible scene. We can talk about this privately, at home." I pulled my arm away as if her touch were toxic. "No. You made this public when you mocked me and my gift in front of 200 people. Now you can deal with the consequences publicly." I looked back at Chloe, who now had tears streaming down her own face. "Chloe, I am so sorry. I love you, and I truly wanted to give you something that would last forever, a piece of our family's real history. But I can't leave it here. After this, I can't trust that it will be respected or safe." I bent down and picked up the chest, holding it securely in my arms. "I'm taking it back." "You can't!" my father blurted out, a raw note of panic in his voice. The fear in his eyes wasn't for my feelings, or Chloe's. It was for himself. The commander. He said it was for them. "What will he think if he finds out you took it back? He'll think we drove you to it." "I think," I said, looking him dead in the eye, my gaze cold and unyielding, "that Commander Thompson would much rather see this artifact safe in my care than in a home where its custodians believe it's fit for firewood." I turned and began to walk away. The crowd parted for me as if I were Moses and the Red Sea. I could feel every eye on my back, but I didn't care. I walked with my head held high, the heavy chest feeling as light as a feather in my arms. I reached the grand ballroom doors, the exit to a life I was leaving behind. Before I walked out, I paused for one final moment and looked back at the wreckage. Chloe was sobbing, being ineffectively comforted by Todd, whose own face was pale with shock. My parents stood isolated in a circle of shame, their magnificent, expensive gift of a luxury car utterly forgotten, a meaningless prop in a drama that had spiraled out of their control. They had tried to make a statement with their wealth, but I had made a statement with my truth. "This conversation is not over, Clara," my father called out, a weak, desperate attempt to regain a shred of control. "Oh, yes it is," I replied, my voice echoing in the vast, suddenly silent room. "It's been over for a very long time. I just didn't realize it until today." And with that, I walked out of my sister's wedding, out of the life they had tried to define for me, and into my own. The heavy oak door closing behind me with a soft, definitive click felt like the final, satisfying chapter of a book I had been forced to read for far, far too long. The moment the grand ballroom door clicked shut behind me, it was as if a soundproof barrier had fallen into place. The cacophony of the reception, the music, the chatter, the whispers was instantly silenced, replaced by the serene, echoing quiet of the hotel's grand hallway. I leaned against the cool marble wall, the solid weight of the hope chest, a reassuring presence against my body. I didn't cry. The anger that had fueled my confrontation had already subsided, leaving behind not emptiness, but a profound, bone-deep sense of relief. It was over. The years of biting my tongue until it bled, of swallowing insults wrapped in faux concern, of shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, gilded world, it was all finally over. My phone buzzed in my clutch purse. I pulled it out. A text from Chloe. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Please call me when you can." A few seconds later, another from my mother. "You have humiliated this family in a way I never thought possible. Your father is furious. You have made a grave mistake." I looked at the two messages, one born of remorse, the other of rage. I slipped the phone back into my purse, ignoring them both. I walked through the opulent lobby, past the judging eyes of the hotel staff who had surely heard the gossip, and out into the cool, clean evening air. I didn't look back. The drive home was an automaton's journey. My hands knew the way, but my mind was miles away, replaying the scene over and over. When I arrived at the small, quiet house that felt more like home than my parents' mansion ever had, I carried the chest not inside, but straight to my workshop. I cleared my main workbench, sweeping away sawdust and tools, and placed the chest in the center, the place of honor. Under the warm, focused glow of my overhead work lamp, the dark wood seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was home. It was safe. It was respected. I spent the rest of the night there, not working, but simply being. I made a pot of strong, black coffee, sat in my grandfather's old wooden chair that was worn smooth with time, and breathed in the familiar, comforting scent of cedar and oak. It was the first time I had felt truly, completely peaceful since Mark had died. I was no longer a victim of their judgment, no longer defined by their disapproval. I had taken back my power. I had reclaimed my narrative. I had honored my husband's memory in the most definitive way possible. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. My phone, which I had silenced, was flooded with missed calls and texts. I answered only one, a call from my Uncle Arthur. "I just wanted to say that I have never been more proud of you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded like relief. "Your father and mother have been blind and deaf to who you really are for years. What you did took an immense, staggering amount of courage." He went on to tell me that the rest of the wedding had been a social disaster. My parents had made a brief, tight-lipped appearance for the cake cutting before leaving early, unable to face the constant whispers and averted gazes. The story of the priceless soldier's chest had become the main event, completely overshadowing the $60,000 car. Later that week, a massive bouquet of white lilies, my favorite, arrived at my door. The card was from Chloe. "I'm horrified by what happened. Mom and Dad had no right to treat you or your beautiful gift that way. I hope one day you can forgive me for my part in it, for not speaking up sooner. I love you." It was a start. I knew my relationship with my sister would be complicated and would need careful rebuilding, but her apology felt genuine, a first step out from under our parents' shadow. The real surprise, the one that would change the trajectory of my life, came a week after that. I received an email from a local journalist, a columnist for the city's main newspaper, who had been a guest at the wedding. He wrote that he had been incredibly moved by the story and wanted to write a human interest piece about the gift, about Mark's service, and about my woodworking craft. I was hesitant, but after speaking with Commander Thompson, who gave his full blessing and even agreed to be quoted, I agreed. The article, which ran on the front page of the lifestyle section, was titled "The Sergeant's Chest, a Gift of Priceless Love." It went viral in our community. My small, self-made business website crashed from the sudden influx of traffic. My email inbox and voicemail were flooded with orders and inquiries from all over the country. People didn't just want furniture. They wanted a piece with a story, with integrity, with a soul. My life, which had felt so small and quiet since Mark's passing, was suddenly filled with a new, vibrant purpose and an avalanche of opportunity. I was no longer just Mark's grieving widow, or Richard and Eleanor's disappointing daughter. I was Clara Riley, the artisan, the keeper of a legacy. The dawn of my new life was breaking, and it was more beautiful and brilliant than I could have ever imagined. 10 months after my sister's wedding, my world was a place I scarcely recognized, transformed from a landscape of grief and obligation into one of purpose and prosperity. The local news story had been syndicated, picked up by a national military family blog, and even a popular woodworking magazine. My business, which I had renamed Riley's Legacy Woodcraft, had exploded. The quiet solitude of my workshop was a distant memory. I had to lease a larger commercial space downtown and hire 2 apprentices to keep up with the overwhelming demand. My first 2 hires were veterans, a former Marine sniper and an Army logistics specialist, both transitioning to civilian life and looking for a new, tangible skill. They were quiet, dedicated, and understood the ethos behind the work. Our workshop, once my solitary sanctuary, was now a bustling, creative hub of camaraderie and shared purpose. We weren't just building furniture. We were building new lives, one handcrafted piece at a time. The sergeant's chest, as it had become known to the public, sat in a custom-built, climate-controlled glass case in the center of my new, larger showroom. It was the first thing people saw when they walked in. It was my centerpiece, my origin story, a silent testament to the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. It was no longer a source of pain or humiliation, but a powerful symbol of strength, integrity, and the true meaning of value. With the success of the business, I was finally able to do something I dreamed of. I used a significant portion of my new income to establish the Sergeant Mark Riley Memorial Fund, a nonprofit charity that provided scholarships and seed grants to military spouses looking to start their own small businesses or learn a new trade. It was my way to pay forward the unwavering support Mark had always given me, to turn our intensely personal story into a force for good that could ripple out and help others. The first grant recipient was a young Army wife in Texas who wanted to become a certified welder. Her thank you letter, written on tear-stained paper, was more valuable to me than any check I had ever received. My life was full, not with the noise of society events and hollow compliments, but with the quiet, profound satisfaction of meaningful work and genuine human connection. My relationship with my family had been a slow, cautious, and often painful reconstruction. Chloe and I had started talking again, first through tentative texts, then long, difficult phone calls, and eventually, quiet lunches at a neutral cafe halfway between her home and my workshop. She was wrestling with her own role in our family's dysfunctional dynamic, a lifetime of seeking an approval that was always just out of reach. "I spent my whole life trying to win a game that was rigged," she admitted one afternoon, stirring her iced tea. "I never stopped to think about what was right, only what would please them. Seeing you walk out of my wedding that day, it was terrifying, but it was also like watching someone break out of a prison I didn't even know I was in." Her marriage to Todd was strained. The foundation of parental approval and financial backing they had built it on was now cracked and unstable. But for the first time in her life, Chloe was trying to find her own footing, and I was trying to be the sister she needed, not the one our parents had pitted me against. My parents were a different, more complex story. The social fallout from the wedding had been swift and brutal. They had become pariahs in their own circle, the story of their behavior solidifying into a local legend, a cautionary tale of arrogance and disrespect. For months, they were radio silent, a silence born of fury and shame. Then, one crisp autumn afternoon, their unfamiliar, less ostentatious car pulled up to my new workshop. They got out, looking older, smaller, and more uncertain than I had ever seen them. My father was holding a small, clumsily wrapped box. "We came to apologize," he said, his voice gruff and strained, his gaze fixed on a point just over my shoulder. "What we did at the wedding? It was inexcusable. There's no other word for it." My mother nodded, her eyes watery and, for the first time, seemingly genuine. "We were wrong, Clara. We were so focused on appearances, on what we thought mattered. We lost sight of what actually does. We lost sight of you." I led them inside, my guard still up, a lifetime of conditioning hard to overcome. We stood awkwardly amidst the scent of fresh-cut lumber and the hum of machinery. "This is for you," my father said, pushing the box into my hands. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple silver frame. In it was a photo of me and Mark on our wedding day. It wasn't one of the formal portraits my mother had insisted on. It was a candid shot, taken by a friend, of us laughing, our heads close together, completely lost in our own world. It was a photo I knew they had always disliked, because it wasn't posed, because it captured a joy so authentic it couldn't be manufactured or controlled. "We were going through old albums," my mother explained, her voice trembling slightly, "and we realized we never truly saw how happy he made you. We were too busy judging him by our ridiculous standards to see him through your eyes. For that, I am so sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology. Years of ingrained behavior, of a flawed value system, couldn't be erased in a single afternoon. But it was a start. It was an acknowledgement. I saw in their faces not the arrogant real estate developer and the society queen, but two people who had built their lives on a fragile foundation of status and were now watching it crumble, realizing too late that it had never been a true shelter from the storms of life. I didn't offer them false forgiveness. I didn't say, "It's okay." That would have been a lie. Instead, I said, "Thank you for this." I took them on a tour of the workshop. I told them about the foundation, about the veterans I was now employing. I showed them the life I had built, not in spite of them, but in spite of their values. A life built on the principles Mark had taught me: honor, integrity, and purpose. We established new, fragile boundaries that day. They could be in my life, but on my terms. Our relationship would have to be based on mutual respect.